Wachimiswe, RoseAnne Archibald, Hi, everyone. Welcome to our press conference. First, I want to just say miigwech thank you to the Permanent Mission of Canada, who are sponsoring our press conference today. In Cree, I just said greetings and my name and where I'm from. I am the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, and of course the first woman to be elected to this position. First of all, I want to just say miigwechtin and askamun for the inspiring leaders who are joining me in the front row today. Before I introduce them, I want to always acknowledge the Creator, the world around us, and our place within it, and to say miigwech to the Lenape peoples for hosting us on their beautiful territory. Welcome and thank you for joining us at this 22nd session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We welcome you to today's press briefing, and the purpose of holding this press conference is for First Nations to talk about their priorities and what has driven us from our home fires all the way here to New York City to this global forum this week. To my left are Chief Joe Aphonse, who is the Tŝilhqot'in National Chief. Beside him is Vice Chief Aly Bear from the Federation of Indigenous Sovereign Nations. And to the left of her is former Cookpee Judy Wilson, and also a part of our Canadian delegation, and of course Grand Council Chief Reginald Niganobe from the Anishinabek Nation. In the front row we have Chief Norma Catarat, not Norman, from Buffalo River Dene Nation. We also have Haley Rose, one of the youth, and over there I see Taylor Tŝilhqot'in Ben and Ashley Daniels, who are on the AFN Youth Council. So we have what we call an international panel to honor this International Indigenous Forum. Each First Nation is unique, and if you're looking for uniformity, you won't find it. However, you will find that we are united in our support of one another and the indivisible common vision that we share, which is happy, healthy children surrounded by the love and care of their families, living in safe and vibrant communities. And that vision starts with ensuring that Indigenous women and girls are, and two-spirited, are loved, cherished, safe, protected, and treated with dignity and respect always. As First Nations at this United Nations Permanent Forum, we're taking the microphone to amplify our priorities of decolonizing, decarbonizing, and calling out the systems that undermine and harm Mother Earth and our mother tongue and matriarchy. Internationally, we must take a families first approach to the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2S+. And I've asked Judy Wilson to be that voice for her family and for all families. We did hear Deb Haaland at the beginning of this forum say, if we don't empower our women, our climate goals won't succeed. And I would add that we must also empower our youth who are sitting with us today. Youth are often called the leaders of tomorrow, but everyone knows that I always call them the leaders today. So at last year's forum, I requested the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to come to Canada to investigate violations of Indigenous rights in Turtle Island. And I wanted to thank him for traveling to us last month, and I was happy to be sitting in the plenary with him this morning. I look forward to his findings and recommendations this Friday, and ultimately his report to the United Nations Human Rights Council in September. And that's why these forums are so important. It's a way for all Indigenous people across the world to connect and to work together on common goals. So now I'd like to invite my fellow panelists to highlight the issues that bring them to this year's United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Miigwech for listening. So we'll start with Chief Joe Aphonse.
Jonathan, Hatil, Johnny Deal and Nilal High Deal, Chikainitan, John Kainin and Jet, yet all tick. Want to acknowledge, the lands that we are on. Not sure what the nation, Lenape people. We hope to leave this area and not have any negative effect on their territories. It's customary that we always get permission from those nations before we travel their territories and stuff. So to do business on their land, we have to acknowledge at the very least. So I'm here. I'm tribal chair for the Tŝilhqot'in National Government. We are 2014 won Aboriginal right and title case in Canada, the only First Nation to win Aboriginal title. We have 1,800 square kilometers that's all owned by Tŝilhqot'in people. Reserve lands and all that territories we always say is ours, but there's nothing that's actually 100% owned. Canada and BC don't have jurisdiction on those lands, we do, and stuff. And it's to tell that story, to tell that journey, to share that with other Indigenous people, regardless of what country they come from, to inspire, to bring hope. It's a lonely place when you stand up for your rights. We fought Tŝilhqot'in mine, which would have been the largest copper and gold mine in North America. As part of that journey, it was a big part of our fight to win title. How many times we stood there, we were told there's no way you guys can beat them. You got pro-government, Canada government, Stephen Harper government. You got pro-provincial government, Gordon Campbell government. You guys have no chance. There's always a chance. Tŝilhqot'in people, we're Dene people. Our role is to travel before the other Denes and obtain land. We're a warlike people. We love a fight. Doesn't matter if we win or lose. As long as we're fighting, we're happy. Even if we have no chance, we have a fight. And if we lose that fight, we will come back. We will re-strategize, study our enemy, and we will come back twice as hard. That's the way it's been with the Tŝilhqot'in. Twice we beat them. When everybody else says there was no hope, so we signed a business deal. We don't believe in that. Whatever you believe, you stand behind it 100%. And to stand there, often we had to stand there alone, feeling alone. Everybody would tell us how foolish we were. To win Aboriginal title on the eve of our court case, every Aboriginal organization, every Aboriginal lawyer in Canada told us you have no chance of winning. Withdraw your case. Withdraw your case. We reminded them, 1864, at the conclusion of the Tŝilhqot'in War, 6 of our war chiefs were executed. But in today's day and age, if we lose that case, we just lose it. We don't get executed. So what are you guys afraid of? We lose, we'll go back, we'll re-strategize, we'll come back. This is what it means to be Tŝilhqot'in. In our world, we're only here for a short time. When you guys cross over, there's going to be 6 chiefs waiting on the other side. You explain to them why you withdrew when they paid the ultimate price to protect our culture and our way. So we said we will move forward. We didn't have a lot of friends when we said we were going to move forward. But suddenly everybody was our best friend when that court decision came down. We said, it's not whether we win or lose. We have done everything we can in our power. The only thing left is for that courtroom up there to finally look at us and actually acknowledge us as human beings. That's what this case is about. And it's to stand up for yourself, stand up for your family. We want a better quality of life. You look at statistics all across Canada, it's all. And for our win in the Tŝilhqot'in War, we declared war on white people in 1864. And what led to that was the final straw was when they took our head war chief's daughter and they used her for entertainment. And they abused her. The Tŝilhqot'ins declared war on them. And I thank our mothers in winning that Aboriginal title. You can change all of the Tŝilhqot'in chiefs every month if you want. But the position of the Tŝilhqot'in will always stay the same. Because our mothers and their teachings to all of our children. The first thing we learn as Tŝilhqot'in is that under a flag of truce, we went in to talk peace. And they jumped our ward chiefs and took them and tried them as murderers and executed them. And because of those teachings by our women, our mothers, it's the reason why we won our case. So I'll leave it there. We got some other members on the board here, and I don't want to take too much more of our time.
Thank you very much, Chief Joe. Vice Chief Aly Bear.
Ha, a petu washte, a tue iohana, a chiapi te tonkaska wi amaki a peye wa pahaska o yate tahawahi. Good day. My name is Tatanka Skawi. My English name is Aly Bear. I'm the third Vice Chief of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, and I am honored and proud to represent the 74 nations in the Saskatchewan region in Canada. I'm from Wapahaska Oyate, which is Whitecap Dakota First Nation, and I'm a proud Dakota Wean. And I'm honored to be here today with each and every single one of you. As a young leader, I know I have a lot of ways to go and a lot to learn still, so it's a huge honor to be able to sit here and to speak to these issues. But also from a younger perspective, you know, first and foremost, I'm a mother, and I have 2 daughters that have to grow up in this society. And this society right now is targeting our women and our girls and our two-spirited plus. And we need to be doing more to protect them. We need to be making sure that these issues are at the forefront because they continue to get overlooked and we continue to see more women go missing and murdered. Right now, currently, in Canada, we do have the MMIW inquiry from 2019 and the 231 calls to justice that need to be implemented because we continue to see an increase of our Indigenous women being murdered, especially the latest case, Linda Beardy in Winnipeg, who was just recently found in a landfill. We are not trash. We are not garbage. We deserve to be valued. Traditionally, our women held high respect in our communities. And is that colonial violence that came here, that colonial mindset that came here and, you know, put us to the lowest of the hierarchy. And now we're regaining that power. We're regaining that leadership as we see National Chief here as the first woman National Chief. And we see a lot more women chiefs standing up and stepping up. Chief Norma Catarat here, a strong Dene leader of her nation. And I'm very honored to be here with her today. Our youth chief, Haley Rose. We need to continue to protect each other. And we need to make sure that we are calling on all levels of government to take this issue seriously because we need to put it into it. And this is not just an Indigenous issue. This is everyone's issue. Everybody in society should be protecting one another and our future generations and our children. And I say that and I ask that and I call upon all levels of government as a mother, as a lawyer, and as the third Vice Chief of the FSIN. Padame Matakawas.
Miigwech, Chief Bear. Judy?
Waikakaita. I also want to acknowledge the Lenape people of the land here, and also all of our women and youth here, and the ones that will be listening in around the world, because this is the place we gather at the United Nations to be able to share our voices and share our space. So I'm very honored to share the space here, and thank you, National Chief, for creating this space. I think our leadership, when they create the space, we can amplify those issues, as you heard from our Tŝilhqot'in Nation and from Aly here, the Vice Chief, of all the issues that we're going through. So despite its commitments, Canada continues to breach and violate the principles and standards affirmed in the UN Declaration. Our country is just having legislation to implement it through an action plan, but Canada continues to deny the existence of Indigenous title and treaty rights, inherent title and treaty rights, which our nations have never ceded, surrendered, or sold, despite having been forcibly displaced from our homelands and regulated to reserves that total to 0.02 of the Canadian landmass. And so when Chief Joe is talking about how they took our land, they forced us on reserves, and they didn't recognize or are still refusing to recognize our territorial lands. And the Tŝilhqot'in people have been having the long time in courts across the country in securing their title for their land. So the assumption that the Crown title to the 99.8% of our territory land is the very dispossession that the United Nations condemns. We do not even hold title to our reserves. People don't realize that we're still wards of the government, and we don't hold title to our reserves. That's the other thing. I think we raised that in the AFN report to the federal government. And our people are still wards, and we still have our programs and services. So all of our wealth is taken from our land, and it comes back to us in forms of programs and services that impoverish us. So you hear many chiefs talk about that, where I'm just managing poverty on our lands. So when the title and rights of the Indigenous people are perceived to be in conflict with the assumed national interest or the agenda or priorities of Crown government that often align with corporate interests, the title and rights of Indigenous peoples are repeatedly infringed and violated. So we can see that continually over and over. You probably heard a lot of that today when we're in the Assembly with the Indigenous Peoples Rapporteur of Indigenous People. Some of those core issues, when we talk about we're still under that colonial blanket, it's a colonial framework that we're under. And it's really the Section 2 of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the Common Law Interpretation Act on 35.1 relies heavily on the doctrine of discovery, and that's when we're saying repudiate the doctrine of discovery, and the Pope repudiated it, but there's a lot of the work in dismantling it and revoking it in law because the courts and the legislation and the government still rely on that framework. So, which negatively impacts us on our day-to-day life as Indigenous people and nations. It includes the imposition of Crown sovereignty over Indigenous lands, including the self-government rights, and it's disregarding Indigenous laws and legal traditions. Many of ours are still intact because our lands are still intact. We still hold those Indigenous laws and legal orders and jurisdiction. And establishing that the Crown has that ultimate title to the land. That's what we're pushing back on. That's what we're saying. No, they don't. They have something called assumed title and jurisdiction. We never consented to it. They never conquered us. They never ceded us. We didn't surrender to them. So the burden, however, the burden of proof is imposed on our Indigenous peoples and nations to establish their rights in courts. And I can't fathom how long Chief Joe's been at this and the cost of it. You know, it's the burden was placed on their nation. That's not right. And I know they're very strong, and they will continue that. We've supported them in the courts, and will continue to support this work. And the other racist notion is the frozen in time, the Vander Peet legal test for establishing our Aboriginal rights. We're constantly fighting that with fisheries. We're constantly fighting that over our rights and our resources and the land. So that's the other thing. And the ability for the Crown to infringe Aboriginal rights based on the Sparrow legal test, so the justifications for infringing Canada got a national pipeline, and then they're infringing, coming through our territory without our consent. So there's like all kinds of examples of these different infringements. And the erosion of the government's duty to consult and accommodate to nothing more than procedurally right that is reviewable based on administration and law principles. So that's the other part, is the consultation. Now it should be free, prior informed consent, which was something we're going to have to move the bar on. I wanted to touch on something Aly touched on, was the Indigenous women and communities in Canada are facing a crisis. You know, I was just at the NWAC side event on missing murdered women and climate change. So, you know, some of the provinces were noting the statistics, and they're similar all across Canada, that our women are missing and murdered, and our two-spirit and diverse gender, and our men and boys too. They're almost getting to be at almost the same amounts now, which is, you know, against our Indigenous people. So they're, especially when they're land protectors or water protectors, you know, they're even more vulnerable and more attacked, especially when they're in vulnerable states like in downtown Eastside or Winnipeg or Manitoba or Ottawa. We've seen that firsthand when we're in Ottawa just a few weeks ago for our Special Chiefs Assembly, how marginalized our women are, and, you know, the impacts that our women have that they're going through. But we did have recommendations many years ago for the UN Permanent Forum. You know, we wanted to include Indigenous lands, territory, and resources, you know, as a standing agenda in the forum. We wanted to be able to have a better Indigenous coordinating body, which I just came from. The Tŝilhqot'in supported that. They were just having their hosted meeting across the street there. There's still a lot of changes that we have to do, but we have to be involved in these mechanisms. And you know, a large part I spend on climate and environment and missing murdered women, but you know, they're all connected. All of it's connected. That's why, you know, we have to have the equal opportunities to have these spaces to be able to speak on these different issues. But because it is about our self-determination, it is about the nations deciding, you know, what avenues they're going to go. It isn't Canada's determination. We're not under Canada. We're our own nations. The self-determination has to be driven by our nations. Cook's Jam, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. And our final speaker is Grand Council Chief Reginald Niganobe.
Oni bonjour, Kwinget Anishinabek Mesbeaging Donjaba Nemedodum, Anishinabek Nation Gig the Ogdama Nin Miigwech National Chief, for your invitation today is much appreciated, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Reginald Niganobe from Mississauga First Nation, and I'm part of the Sturgeon Clan, and I'm an elected Grand Council Chief of the Anishinabek Nation. Yesterday, the Anishinabek Nation spoke at the thematic discussion about the issue of Line 5 in the Mackinac Strait. Anishinaabe peoples are peoples of the Great Lakes Basin. The international border creates an artificial divide between our American and Canadian families. At the United Nations, we'll continue to seek clarity on the application of principles of free, prior, and informed consent when it comes to state actors and Indigenous peoples that do not live within their domestic jurisdiction. For example, Line 5 crosses through Wisconsin, Michigan, and then terminates in Ontario. Should Canada, as a signatory to UNDRIP, be informed about the need to ensure that Indigenous bands in America must also be consulted in the creation, monitoring, and decommissioning of major energy projects? As many Anishinaabe have stated, Godwe Wangazid Anishinaabe, we are one Anishinaabe family, no matter if we are U.S. federally recognized tribes or Canadian Indian Act bands. I'd also like to highlight the ongoing situation in Thunder Bay, Ontario, with the over-policing and over-incarceration of our people, our two-spirited, missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls concerns, and the deaths of young Indigenous peoples in that community. There's been a number of expert reports presented that require a strong commitment to implementation to remedy the human rights situation, and we encourage the Government of Canada and the Province of Ontario to follow the direction given by those reports as we continue to monitor the situation and advocate for safer living conditions for our own Anishinaabe peoples and other Indigenous peoples in Thunder Bay. Additionally to that, Policing remains a core issue for Indigenous peoples. And I'd like to highlight that the Ontario First Nations police chiefs have filed a complaint with the Canadian Human Rights Commission on the inequitable funding of Indigenous police services. We've seen the value of Indigenous police forces being run for and by the community. They are more responsive and understanding of intergenerational trauma and how that leads to more Indigenous peoples being in contact with the police. We at the Anishinabek Nation are also concerned with safeguarding Anishinabek sovereignty, possession, and jurisdiction over data, genomics, omics, and artificial intelligence. Current data practices, both in force and draft legislation, do not align with the Anishinabek Nation's sacred duty to protect, preserve, and ensure the well-being of the peoples of the seventh generation. We are worried that data priorities that weaponize data could create further dispossession at the expense of our inherent rights. With that, it is important to engage on this international stage to monitor how state actors will use novel or complex jurisdictions like data governance or the implementation of FPIC to push through agendas that serve corporations and not people. As Anishinaabe people, we worry that a lack of attention to the guidance and wisdom of Indigenous people will lead to more poor policies for human health and well-being. We are proud to stand alongside our international Indigenous brothers and sisters and call for a sustainable future based on Indigenous leadership. Miigwech.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers. We are told that we're okay for time in terms of Q&A because there's nobody coming after us, so really appreciate that. And understand it's customary for the first question to go to the UNCA, which is the United Nations Correspondents Association. So I'm not sure if one of them is in the room with a question. If not, we'll just open it up for general questions. Oh, sorry, we need to get you a mic. Yeah, the mic is on your side. There you go.
Yeah, working for the French News Agency, I just would like to ask you to elaborate a little more on the situation of women, and on the other hand, here at the UN and this forum, you can see that a lot of leaders, women, are participating. Which is the situation in your lands and here? It's just like it's a little contradiction, because could you? Well, I don't know if it's a contradiction, but I think it's like a huge empowerment of women among the indigenous population, right? Can you explain? Thank you.
Did you want a specific panelist or just generally? Okay.
So the question, it's about if there's a contradiction because there's more Indigenous women in leadership, but there's also missing and murdered Indigenous women epidemic happening. Yeah, well, as I mentioned, traditionally Indigenous women have always been leaders in their communities. We have our matriarchs and so forth, but Indigenous women and our two-spirited brothers and sisters have been targeted because of that respect and authority that we've always held in our communities. So for a very long time, that colonial ideology of a hierarchy and patriarchy and misogyny has also been embedded in our communities. As mentioned, the Indian Act, the Band Council system, something that we never consented to. We have treaty rights, we have inherent rights, but we've never had an implementation of a treaty act, or we actually had the Indian Act, which was incredibly racist, and it actually created more harm. And that's where the Band Council system was implemented. And from that implemented a lot of those colonial ideologies. And so that's why we didn't have a lot of women in leadership for a very long time. And that's why we see a lot of lateral violence as well in our communities, because that comes from that colonial violence. And now we're dealing with colonial violence and lateral violence and harms on our peoples when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous people in general. And we see a rise in that. But now we see that traditional women in leadership coming to the forefront at the same time. And that's why I think we're talking more about our missing and murdered Indigenous sisters and two-spirited relatives, because this has been overlooked for far too long. And we just had our first national gathering in Vancouver, and there was thousands of families. The FSIN serves 128 families in our province alone, and that's not even all the families for missing and murdered. We don't have any justice being served because the justice system's also racist. And then if those women were non-Indigenous women, I think this issue would be taken more seriously. And it's time for us to all take this issue more seriously, to put it into it so that we can feel safe on our own land.
So when we talk about a perspective from matriarchy, or a perspective of life givers and our role, that's essential in our families, but it's also essential in our governance structure, as was mentioned. We need to continue the traditional knowledge to have that foundation, not just for ourselves, but our families, the community, and the nation. So with the disruption of the colonial cloak, or the colonial framework, as we mentioned earlier, and the Indian Act, it displaced that role. And the Indian residential schools that removed our children broke down the families. So the families were, they knew what they were doing. They were not just taking the Indian out of the child, they were taking the entire family governance structure and the community and nation structure out when they did that. So they did it on purpose, besides the language and the culture. So many of the nations now are rebuilding, or reconnecting, I guess is a better word in our world. It's more stronger, reconnecting with who we are, our teachings, our culture, and one of the elders told me that sometimes even in our families we don't even know how to talk to each other anymore because of that whole colonial system. The children weren't supposed to be heard from, the women were, not being acknowledged or respected. So the violence continued from residential school into the communities, and a lot of that is being restructured. Even though with the Indian Act it's really hard, because it's almost like a conditioning in the community, because they are trying to remember who were we before that. So when we go back on the land, and when we hunt and we fish and we harvest and get plants and medicines, there is that collective memory that comes back of who we are as a nation, as a people, and how we need to have that balance and that harmony. So will the Indian Act structure survive? I don't know. Some nations are doing hybrid type things. I'm looking to the nations that are reconstituting themselves in the sense of reconnecting with the land and their governance systems. There are some in the nations that are doing that. And I always explain to our leadership not to be afraid of it. I said, many of you are already spokespersons in your families. Ideally, my older sister would be our spokesperson, our matriarchy. My mother is 86, so she's still the one that's in our, calls all the shots, I guess. But, that I think our people had that system for a reason, right, and passed that on. A lot of our laws are based on coexistence with everything and interconnectedness. So I just wanted to say that and really support what Aly is saying about that structure, because we're going into the whole implementation of the UN Declaration, but it doesn't mean we're implementing the colonial structure continually. We need to shift from that and protect our territories, like what our nations here are talking about, and rebuilding. I heard a lot of great words from our chiefs here, that how they're talking about doing that, and that's the where we need the resources and the funding, and the government to quit taking us to court when we're standing up for our own land, our own water, and our own people.
Thank you both for that. I do just want to add one more thing to this conversation. As the first woman national chief, these spaces are particularly difficult for women, especially at this juncture, and being the first is always a really difficult place to be. And so we're seeing the resurgence of matriarchy and the respect of matriarchy happening, but we're not to the place of gender equality or gender parity in leadership. Women are half the population, yet right now I think we stand at about 24% of chiefs across Canada. So we still have quite a ways to go. But what's interesting about this question is that, you know, we are bringing forward those issues that have not been discussed in the past. And this is the second United Nations forum where I have spoken about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so what's important about this issue is that there are families that are affected directly, and those families need a space internationally. And that's why I had asked former Cookpee Judy Wilson to be the voice of not only her family, but to let other families know that there's a space for them here. But last October, the Commission on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women released the general recommendation on the rights of Indigenous women and girls. And so this is a historic, I would say, human rights document, providing legally binding recommendations, obligations to governments around the world. So we're calling on governments everywhere, all the nation states that belong to the UN, to make sure that this recommendation is implemented. And it's very much connected to the work that we are trying to do in creating spaces for conversations about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2S people. Now, I just want you to know that we do have some young people, our youth leaders here. So if there are questions, we want to let you know that they're available to come up to the mic as well, because it's not just about the panel at the front, but we know that our youth leaders have been doing great work here at the UN, you know, facilitating, participating in many, many side sessions, and leading some of them. So that's really important work for the future as we move forward here at the UN and become more and more active and look toward a permanent mechanism, a permanent space for Indigenous women, which was called for today by a representative from, I believe, Central America. So with that, I'll turn back and see if there are any questions in the room, and if not, I'll go to the online. I'm not sure if there are any people online who had their hands raised or had any questions, but anyone in the room? Chief? Yeah. You have to grab a mic. It's right beside you to the left.
Sorry about that. You've all heard about carbon credits. What are your thoughts on carbon credits?
Go ahead.
Well, I think they're always inventing something more and more tenures, more credits, more, and that they can control. I know our elders say, how can you control water? How can you control the air? Well, you know, Mother Nature controls, or Creator controls that. So I think they're just coming always up with more things they can trade to pollute more, and contaminate more, and justify more what they're doing. So if we take the carbon credits from the Amazon or another country, oh, I can pollute more over here. So it's not really a fair process. I think it's just like more mathematical numbers to use. So I think it's our jurisdiction, our laws, and our ways of knowing that at the end of the day are going to be what we need to be leading with. I know one of the chiefs in our area one time, when he first was hearing about climate crisis, well, change at that time, and the Arctic people were telling us it's already here, he was saying, well, how do we control that in our territory that these government and state industry is doing? He said, maybe we should just have our laws already, you know, what we can't see, the zero emissions in our territory. So he said, that's what he told me anyway. But anyway, there's probably a more sophisticated way to answer that. But I just was also asking our elders what they thought about it. But they said, just coming up with something else to trade to justify continued pollution, which we know needs to end because of the climate crisis.
Go ahead, Chief, Grand Council Chief.
Yeah, I view it as another way to pass off on exactly what she said. Now the way to pass off on things that could be tangibly done right away. As I mentioned in our discussion of Line 5, Line 5 could effectively be shut down. It was supposed to be shut, it's supposed to have a duration of 50 years. It's well beyond the 50 years now. It's 50 years plus another 15 years of operation, plus however long they can keep it going with a lot of their court challenges and everything else they're doing, or the interference that Canada can run for them. That's a tangible thing that they could do tomorrow. It wouldn't impact very heavily on fuel or oil in any way, shape, or form. They can transfer it somewhere else if they really wanted to, and other avenues of transferring it, but they choose to keep that line in operation for no reason at all. So, yeah, there's more effective resources that they could do, or more effective things that they could do that they're not doing.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. Any other questions in the room or online? There's one question? Or somebody has their hand up. Sorry, I'm looking at the technician in the room. Maybe, Andrew, you could ask him. Okay, no questions online. Okay, well, I don't see anybody else raising their hand in the room, so I want to again thank the panelists for participating, and for those of you who've joined us today. Miigwech, Ninanuskamun. Have a great rest of your day.